Hi folks, this is Dr. Hartman here, and I wanted to give you a little bit of an introductory video as we move forward into our first readings for this week. So what I'm going to talk through are some of my notes as I was reading through both the text, English Studies and Transforming English Studies. Obviously the Bruce Mikomiski is how I'm going to say it, and I'll probably say it differently every time. Text is the longer text, and then there's just a short piece from Olson in the Transforming English Studies text. So use this video to help you begin to think about the reading. You might come back to this video to say, hey, did I understand this? So one of the things that's interesting about this particular week and this particular reading is that it's kind of silly to think that we don't really have a clear definition of what English Studies is. So you might, before you read, just take a few minutes wherever you've been jotting down notes or wherever you're going to be taking notes to think about what is your definition of English or English Studies. You could even list what you feel like the attributes are. As you do this, you might find that it's kind of hard to do. And do you think it's bad that you're getting a master's in a discipline that's sort of undefinable? My husband, who is exercise science, would say yes, that's absolutely not a good thing. That means you're undisciplined, that means you don't have strong research in your field, but he comes from a very different area. I personally don't have a problem with it, and as we'll learn in some of these readings, both of these texts work to explore, problematize, and realize that it's kind of good. I think overall that English Studies is this constant changing and merging field. I really like this particular chunk from the Mikomiski text. He says, my own position is a negotiation of crisis rhetoric and nonchalance. With Berlin and Eagleton, I am concerned about the way that disciplinary incoherence affects the entire period of English Studies, both inside and outside the academy. However, it is also true that specialization and its constant companion, incoherence, have been endemic to modern universities since their emergence in the late 19th century, and the push toward further specialization will surely not abate any time soon. With Elbow and Graf, I do not see any good reason to declare that the sky is falling or that English Studies is in crisis. For one thing, I believe that the problems English Studies faces at the moment are, in fact, thoroughly solvable. And in any case, if we want to fix an academic problem in a discipline that we care about, the very worst thing we can do is declare that discipline, to be in crisis. And Olson kind of introduces and concludes the discourse of crisis notwithstanding, such meta-level reflection is healthy. It is what helps us keep sight of our collective values and pursuits, our disciplinary distinctiveness, even when we can't all agree on precisely what those values and pursuits are. So now I'll focus mainly on the Mikomiski text, since Olson's is just 2 pages and just basically gives the introduction and lets you move into the specific chapters. So some things to pay attention to. You're going to get a lot of potentially new terms for yourself, things like linguistics and discourse analysis, rhetoric and composition, creative writing, literature and literary criticism, critical theory and culture studies, and English education. So first, with the Mikomiski text from English Studies, you're going to get a little bit of history. Did you know that we didn't always have English as a subject? And as my note said, say what? That kind of doesn't make sense, right? Since probably all of you have had long-standing educational experiences in the subject of English. However, we have to realize that there's a long history of organized education. And so the foundations of English and having an English department really didn't happen until just before the 1900s, the late 1800s, where Harvard became pretty much the first university in the United States, and thus they developed the first English department. And the foundation of an English department and kind of university curriculum in general were English, specifically rhetoric, grammar, and logic were a part of that. and kind of mathematical scientific areas like arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and music. So, as the text discusses, rhetoric was the foundation of a liberal education, and rhetoric is typically seen as oration, so speech and thought processes out loud. Education systems, the development of the system of education, shaped English studies and the subject of English as a course or something to be studied. So I want you to notice some of the following things as you're reading through this opening introduction in the English studies text. Notice how labor and class and a need for an educated citizenry became social, cultural, and financially based issues. And those started to influence and be woven into the history of English. Notice what initially defined and were included as part of the first English department at universities like Harvard. Notice how the things that we find more common now, like American literature, were not part of originally formed English departments. Notice how areas like composition were sort of taken on as other disciplines at the university level decided to stop putting as much effort and attention to things that were seen sort of as remedial, like writing and composition. Notice how the root of linguistics came from philology, and then how philology had a big influence on literature, literary analysis, and ultimately a birth of creative writing. And then that sort of started to form these dichotomies within English departments. And you had the humanist critics who studied ideas of literature from the creative writing perspective, this living, breathing language on paper. And then language scientists who were looking to systematically study the words that were on the page. And then notice how certain types of study and research got attention based on kind of these specialty areas that were developed, and how publications came out of those specialty areas, and how that influenced what was given attention in terms of research in an English department, and then what got funded to do research in terms of university funding. I think some of you who have an education background will find it interesting that John Dewey is brought into the conversation, and how he really illuminates or helps the author illuminate ideas of theory and practice. A lot of people feel that there's a theory versus practice dichotomy, but he kind of tries to talk about the integration of those two, and the author uses that. Also notice in the history how towards the 60s and 70s an influence of national and state mandated standards and competency testing wound up encouraging areas like English education and composition to kind of come to the forefront in English departments and get a little more street cred. Notice also how a growing middle class coming into universities shifted what areas of study were valued. Notice how the coverage model, the chapter will go into detail about the coverage model, which is typically how probably if you're an English major, what you studied, how that developed English curriculum, and then how that also influenced the issue and continued issue of hyper-specialization. Notice that Stephen North is brought into the argument, and as the author tries to present solutions to this idea of English studies being in a state of crisis, the idea of fusion, and how to resolve the specialization, hyper-specialization issue. And then as you're reading, think about Mikomitzky's suggestion of reshaping and kind of redefining English studies through analysis, critique, and production of discourse in social context. He uses that grouping of language as a proposition as to how English can kind of use that as an umbrella for explaining and defining what it does, and how the parts can remain parts and then also be integrated amongst the different issues and specialty areas. And then the chapter ends with an overview of the rest of the book and how the rest of the book and the different chapters explores the issues that were initiated in the introduction. So this just gives you some overview of what's to come, or if you've already read the chapter, this might be a nice, did I catch all of these things? Am I understanding? And did I see the attention given to some of these topics? I hope this helps you, and I look forward to the online discussion this week.